The first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
Over humanity!
The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every
Let us
city.
not forget for a moment the toils and efforts that lie ahead.
They say that those who forget their history are condemned to repeat it. This is the History Lessons Podcast with certified financial planning practitioner Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor, and your guide to financial wisdom in the past, present, and future. You ready? Good. Let's get historical.
Historical? Well, yeah, duh. This is the History Lessons Podcast for the week of March the 18th, 2024. I'm still Patrick Huey, author of History Lessons for the Modern Investor. And if you're a modern investor seeking some historical perspective, once again, you find yourself in the right place. This week, we'll be talking about Irish luck, Neapolitan volatility, and the retirement landscape.
But first, the news.
Well, top of the morning to you, fellow leprechauns. Last weekend was St. Patrick's Day, and while Paddy allegedly drove the snakes out of Ireland, some of the more closely watched financial data that slithered in wasn't exactly worth celebrating. Housing starts increased 10.7% in February. The February home building scene was livelier than an Irish pub at midnight. Home building surged back with a vengeance after a fairly soft January, and completions soared to their highest level since 2007. Luck of the Irish? We'll see. Meanwhile, industrial production increased 0.1% in February. The milder winter weather put some pep in the manufacturing sector's step, apparently, with activity rising like a toast of a pint of Guinness. Non-auto manufacturing even posted its largest gain in over a year. Retail sales rose 0.6% in February, and while it seems like decent news, there is no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow here. February sales rose, but not quite as much as expected. Auto sales bounced back like a toddler who ate too much Lucky Charms cereal, but core sales were certainly subdued. Those core sales are a big component for estimating GDP, and they were up only 0.1% in February, and revised significantly lower for previous months, down 0.5%. Last but not least, let's talk about inflation, the hangover that never ends. In February, prices jumped, fueled by rising energy and food prices. Inflation has been on a wild ride lately, showing that driving away this beast is no easy feat. With consumer prices rising and the battle against inflation far from over, seems we'll need more than luck to get rid of it.
Interest rates are rising, and your annuity purchased in the last decade might not be keeping up, which means your financial plan may be falling behind. So if you own a deferred annuity, fixed, indexed, or variable worth more than $250,000, now is the time to review it and make sure it is doing all that it can for you and your financial plan. Let us help you keep your retirement on track. Introducing Victory Independent Planning. VIP turns complex financial matters into clear and confident solutions, so you can relax and enjoy retirement whenever it arrives. Get the Annuity Review Kit now. This complimentary kit includes a variety of checklists, resources, and ebooks to review the fees, features, and flexibility, or lack thereof, in your current annuity contract. It will even help you assess your overall investment goals and the people who are offering you advice. Get the kit today, because you can't teach an old annuity new tricks. To learn how VIP can help you review your annuity, click on the link in the show notes or go to victoryindependentplanning.com. That's victoryindependentplanning.com. Sign up for peace of mind today.
Hey, Alexa, charge the Wayback Machine for me and set it for 1944 AD.
Charging Wayback Machine.
On March 18th, 1944, 26 people die and thousands are evacuated from their homes during an eruption of Mount Vesuvius on the Gulf of Naples. Yeah, it was the least of Italy's worries in those fateful years, and the eruption pales in comparison to the destruction of the one in 79 AD, where Herculaneum and Pompeii were wiped out by volcanic ash and gas. Yet volcanic activity demonstrates that significant risk is still present there. Vesuvius has erupted numerous times, with significant eruptions recorded in 1631, 1794, as well as 1944. These eruptions varied in intensity, causing damage to surrounding settlements and prompting evacuations of nearby populations. But today, over 700,000 people now live in the death zone around Mount Vesuvius. Clearly, the painful lessons of history are no match for the allure of wine, olives, and oceanfront property. Now, despite its frequent activity, Vesuvius remains closely monitored, with scientists and authorities implementing measures to mitigate the potential impact of future eruptions on the densely populated regions surrounding the volcano. The risk is known, and despite the volcano's current quiet period, scientists are attempting to measure and mitigate it. People, that's what we call risk management. Regularly assessing and evaluating risks within a portfolio is akin to navigating a ship through turbulent waters. Then again, that might not be the best metaphor, given that the admiral of the Roman fleet, Pliny the Elder, died sailing to offer assistance to Vesuvius's victims in 79 AD. Nevertheless, portfolio risk management requires vigilance and adaptability. Investors must continually scan the horizon for potential threats that could disrupt the smooth sailing of their investments. Conducting thorough risk assessments involves identifying and analyzing potential threats to the portfolio, including market volatility, interest rate changes, and geopolitical events, all of which we've seen in the last couple of years. Risk management also means staying vigilant and adaptive during the calm periods where nothing is on fire. So now, when nothing seems to be happening, is the best time to make sure you'll be well prepared when market volatility erupts.
Wayback Machine disengaged.
Returning to the year 2024.
Well, finally, this week, it's on to the mailbag.
You've got mail.
And this week's question of the week was, what should I be aware of if I'm retiring in or around 2024? Some of you may have seen this before. If not, if it's new, this is what I like to call my SMART approach. And it's really a meeting that I have with folks early on to assess where they stand with these things: tax planning, income planning, healthcare planning, estate planning, the things that should be somewhat in their control, and decide if it makes sense for them to work with me and put more of those things in the controllable basket through planning. So this SMART approach looks first at sources of income. Do you have a written plan? Do you know where you're going to withdraw from? Are you confident that these savings are going to last for yours and your spouse's potential lifetimes? And then, not necessarily because it goes in this order, but because it makes a nice acronym, we go on to medical and healthcare. Do you have a plan to cover future medical costs? If your plan is, I'm going to go on Medicare, I got news for you. There are out of pocket costs even in Medicare. Medicare does not pay for nursing care, and the cost of Medicare is not static. So you really do need to think about how you're going to pay for those types of things over time. Advanced planning. So are you looking at where your assets are going to transfer when you're gone? Do you have a will and trust in place? And are you sure that your estate plan takes into account your charitable giving and where you want your assets to actually go? Risk management and investments. Do you know the amount of risk that you're taking? Are you confident that you are going to achieve your objectives given the amount of risk that you're willing to take? And are you confident that political or policy changes are not going to negatively affect you? And then finally, tax efficient strategies. Do you have a plan in place to reduce or minimize taxes whenever possible? And that is on an ongoing basis, not just on a year in, year out basis. Do you have a plan in place to minimize your required minimum distributions? Because every required minimum distribution has an investment partner sitting with you. His name is Uncle Sam, and he's going to take a portion of what you ultimately withdraw. And are you looking at how your estate plan will minimize taxes for your heirs as well? So that's the smart approach. I think it's a good way, it's a good snapshot to find out if you're on glide path for retirement and or in retirement. And that's why they have, or I have this Fresnel lens logo on this smart approach. It's a snapshot. Are you above, below, or on glide path? And that's what this Fresnel lens tells a pilot as they're coming into land, especially on aircraft carriers. A little something I know a little bit about from a previous lifetime. So the first thing that we always end up talking about with clients is life expectancy. Why? Because this whole retirement planning thing would be so much easier if we knew exactly when you were going to pass on. Then it'd just be a matter of working back from that date and figuring out how much money we needed to get you through to that particular date. But we don't know that. And we have to make some educated guesses along the way to make sure that we don't run out of money for you early on in retirement. Your money cannot expire before you do. That is the golden rule for retirement planning. So we have to look at the life expectancy probabilities. And I almost always have this conversation with new clients when we start to go through this, because I'll point out if they're age 65 today, then the probability is that at least one of the two of them, if they're a couple, are going to make it into their 90s. And typically they'll come back to me and they'll say, well, I'm never going to live that long. And yet I'll be talking to somebody who's in perfectly good health at age 65. And the answer to that, or the comeback to that is, if you're not, then who is? Because somebody is making these averages go up to where 90% of 65-year-old couples are going to have at least one of them reach 85, and 73% of them are going to have one making it to age 90. If not you, then who? Okay. Now, this is a very common misconception, not only with investors, but with human beings in general. We have a very difficult time imagining ourselves getting older. We have a very difficult time imagining what our lives will be like 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. And that little hole in our logic keeps us from ever being able to think that we would live into our 90s. Although statistically speaking, it's pretty rare that one of two in a couple won't live into their 90s. So I encourage you to really think about life expectancy and be realistic and be conservative, knowing that the worst thing you can do for your children is to run out of money and have to move back in with them later in life. So let's not do that. Let's prepare to retire on our own terms, okay? Let's understand that retirement is a very different proposition today than it was 30, 50, 70 years ago. The old generation retired. They were done. They were worked out, and they had a significantly shorter period in retirement than we do today. And that's important. Quick fact here is Social Security was originally offered at age 62, not because anybody was trying to be generous, but because 62 was the median age of death when they created the program. That's how long people were expected to live. And half of the people on Social Security would pay for the other half who survived. So when you look and see that, now we're expecting people to live into their 70s, 80s, and even 90s, retirement is a much longer proposition. And guess what? That's a long time for people to get bored. So what you're seeing now is people in their 60s, sometimes even 70s, who are in this bucket. They stay active and involved by working. And as crazy as it may seem, at least 38% of them enjoy it. They enjoy their work, so they keep on going into their 60s, sometimes even their 70s. And I've got clients who have continued to work in some capacity well into their early 80s. So don't think of retirement necessarily as a switch being flipped. There may be a phase in and phase out period to your retirement as well. Income replacement needs, every household is different. But on average, what this chart is showing you is that as your income increases, the amount you are going to require from your own savings or potentially your employer's help saving is going to increase. And it's a fairly large increase as time goes on. It goes from 42% in the $100,000 income level to 56% as you hit $300,000. And the reason is fairly obvious. Social Security benefits are capped. They're only going to pay for so much in Social Security, and you're going to be on the hook for the rest. That's the bad news as your income rises. The good news is your changes in expenditures, meaning taxes and fees and things that you pay before you retire, those typically drop off much quicker for higher income brackets than they do for lower income brackets. Now, I would posit to you that some of that may change, and we'll talk a little bit about why when we start talking about taxes. But if you're assuming that you're going to pay a lower tax rate in retirement, even at some of these higher income brackets, that may not be the case. Another one we tend to go into some depth with clients with is Social Security benefit claiming considerations. I know some people don't trust Social Security at this point. They know that it's underfunded. They know that by 2034, the program is going to incur a shortfall, and that makes them nervous. But my job is to make sure that you get all the benefits that you are entitled to. And for me, as you can see on this chart, it's fairly rare that I would tell someone to take Social Security early. Why? Because as long as you are expected to live, let's say, into your 90s, and again, the chances are, if you're a couple, one of the two of you is, and your rate of return, expected rate of return, is fairly moderate or conservative. In this case, it's a little bit over 6.5%, maybe 6.75%. If your expected rate of return is below that, you should be claiming at age 70. Right? You should be getting the maximum out of Social Security that you possibly can. Now, that may depend on how much in assets you have elsewhere. We don't want to deplete your liquid assets in order to put off claiming Social Security. But if you've got an IRA and it's fairly sizable, and you can stretch out, some payments so that you are funding your own retirement from age, let's call it 66 to 67 to 68, and maybe even all the way out to 70, typically we want you to do that because of what it shows you on this chart. What do you do with your own assets? How much can you take? Well, a lot of people have heard about this 4% rule. And the 4% rule states that you can take out around 4% of an initial withdrawal percentage and have a high likelihood of not running out of money over the next 30 years. What's a high likelihood? Well, it's about 85% of the time. A 4% withdrawal rate got you to the end of retirement of 30 years without running out of money. Not bad. Not perfect, but not bad. But what's also interesting is that 66% of the time, you ended up with more than $1 million if you started with $1 million. Interesting, right? Sometimes it even grew to 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million. What that tells you is there is a very wide disparity in the sequence of returns when you look at these scenarios. Okay, so your rule may not be a 4% rule. You may end up taking 6 or 7 or 8 early on in retirement while you're waiting for Social Security, and then let that kick in, and then maybe it drops to 2 or 3%. And this is all highly dependent on how well your investments do early on in retirement. If you get hit right out of the gate with a nasty bear market your first or second year in retirement, your probability of success, your projected outcome using even a 4% rate of withdrawal is different than somebody who is flat or positive or highly positive during those first few formative years in retirement. Rising health costs. This is where we start to talk about healthcare. On the left, $542. That's as of today, a 65-year-old in today's dollars. That's what they're spending for Part B premiums, Part D premiums, out-of-pocket costs, and some type of supplemental policy. We expect by the time they're age 95, that to almost triple. And that's why I say you need to have healthcare planning as part of your overall retirement plan. We're projecting somewhere around 6% as an annual healthcare inflation rate. And that's not new, at least not to me. We've been hovering around 5.75% since I started planning for retirement with people about 15, 20 years ago. Closer look at taxes and tax planning. Remember, these brackets, which are the 2024 brackets, are set to revert to the pre-Tax Cut and Jobs Act brackets in 2026. Okay, but only if Congress does nothing. Well, my fellow historians, that's all for this week. Be sure to check out my book, History Lessons for the Modern Investor, still available on Amazon.com. And be sure to do all the social stuff. Like this episode, follow us wherever you see or hear your podcasts. We're available on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and yes, YouTube. Until next week, when we'll take another rollicking romp through the past and make an investment in your future with history lessons for the modern investor.
See you next week.